Hello, this is Pamela Smythe, Media Relations Manager at the University of Waterloo. I'm one of the hosts of Beyond the Bulletin, the podcast of internal communications at the university. We bring you news and views from the U Waterloo community. Please spread the word that we're on SoundCloud.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And now the interview from episode 96 of Beyond the Bulletin. Philip Beesley uses science, art, and technology in innovative ways to create a dreamlike environment, whether he is designing buildings or creating public art or an engaging installation. The architecture professor and a team, including Prof. Rob Gorbett from Knowledge Integration, students, and hundreds of other collaborators from around the world, created an installation now showing at the Venice Architecture Biennale. He spoke with me from his busy studio, where he and his team are working on their next big project. Welcome, Philip.
Hi, Pamela. I'm really glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you here. I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for so long, so thank you for making the time. Congratulations to you on having your work included at the Venice Architecture Biennale. That is a major accomplishment. Your installation is stunning. It is called Grove. Can you please describe it for people who maybe haven't seen it?
Thank you. At the Venice Biennale, I have been working with a rather large group of collaborators centered in Waterloo architecture in Cambridge and the main campus of Waterloo, and also with several international collaborators as well. And I wonder whether I can ask you to picture those multiple people all working together, but in a very particular place, which is the Arsenale, a very old shipbuilding facility, a vast hall which lines the north end of the Giardini at the Venice Biennale. And the main space is about 8 meters tall, and they have gigantic columns, perhaps a couple of meters, or a meter and a half anyway, in diameter, soaring up in the space. It's quite dark, and it's about 20 meters in width, running for almost a kilometer. At first, you'll see just a rather glittering floating cloud in the distance. And then as you walk closer, you'll see that Grove, the space, has multiple column forms, a little bit like a gathering of a forest. And overhead is a glittering, floating cloud of multiple interlaced spiral elements, all bedecked with glass, shooting light through them and glistening, and a great shadow play like laceworks on the brick walls and the plaster walls in the distance. And then, looking downward, there's a shallow pool at the center of the floor. It's a ring-shaped pool. There's a vast, delicate, fragile world being projected into that space. We've been working in animation and computer-generated graphics with some very special filmmakers, and we've created a vision of worlds information being projected into that pool. And there's a narrative there. That is to say, underneath the great suspended cloud and the surrounding of multiple voices of distributed sound immersing you in the column work, and looking into the pool, there's a little child who is gently moving and touching and surrounded by innumerable materials, as if surrounded by halos and nests and worlds. This child is being born, and it's also suffering and moves into a state of dying as well. And this cycle of grief and joy continues in multiple gentle cycles. And so Grove is an architectural gathering space, and it also tells a story of communion with many other dimensions that reach far beyond our human and social circles.
What a description. Do you have plans to apply elements of Grove in a building, for instance?
Grove is a very practical project in the sense that we've done some quite innovative things in building a special kind of canopy system that can be used for future buildings. And the technical computational systems are kind of a technical essay on how future buildings might be smart, might be intelligent, might come alive and express kind of almost empathy and thinking with us. So the technical visions of Grove are very, very much oriented to how we can build in the future, how we can create sustainable, very lightweight systems. At the same time, it's a spatial composition too. That is to say, it's a place of democracy, of speaking about how we can gather together, how we can live together. And because of the rather intense emotional dimensions that are included in it, there's some qualities of it being a temple as well.
It sounds amazing. So we will post a link for the Living Architecture Systems group, and that will include some films so that people can actually see Grove while listening to your wonderful description. Now, the Venice Biennale was delayed twice because of the pandemic. What effect did it have on your installation at the exhibition?
Perhaps we could say that there isn't a person in the world that hasn't been touched in some fundamental ways, almost perhaps unspeakable ways, by the pandemic of these last year and a half or so. For us, we had quite a large team already committed to a very significant physical architecture that was well into production for the Biennale. And we had to make some decisions about whether to continue or not. And for a while, in fact, we decided to stop and withdraw, which, as you can imagine, had its own heartaches associated with it.
Yes.
But it seemed like the right thing to do in terms of civic responsibility. But we were persuaded to shift because of the vision, perhaps, and the curators very generously said, no, it's really important to do this project. And so we pivoted. We shifted from making physical work into doing digital work and to take the physical visions and to translate them into a whole projected world that you could touch through augmented reality and through distributed sound and through computational systems. And that really promoted, rather than being a disappointment and a frustration, a whole transformation of how we worked. We learned to collaborate intensely, making very, very fine-tuned things with our international groups, and we had wonderful conversations, and we built some new tools, and we also really created some new forms that allow us to say that the spectrum between physical things and things we can touch and things that are just projected and live in the imagination in virtual realities is a very subtle one. It doesn't need to be polarized in terms of either physical or virtual. Instead, there's a whole beautiful kind of continuity. And I've started to say that I'm very grateful that we had this interruption and challenge because we've changed fundamentally in the way we've worked.
Wow, really? Because people may not realize that even though you had this important installation, you were not able to travel to Venice.
It was a pretty challenging experience to be asked not to go and
Yes.
to honor the necessary restrictions that the university has placed on international travel, and then simply working in collaboration using all of that energy in remote tools, and it worked out beautifully, I will say.
So, but in terms of the actual physical installation, how did that work?
There was quite immersive physical material that was still built, but what we did was we invested deeply into radically lightweight new component systems that would use an absolute minimum of material so that we could feel responsible in shipping it over. And we prefabricated a lot in Toronto, then we flat packed it, and we invested in very deep documentation. Something rather beyond paint by number, where you control everything, because it wasn't simply a paint by number scheme, although it could have been executed that way. Rather, what we did was we documented every single bit. We made demonstrations of how to work, and then we equipped people with their own agency and created open systems so that then they could interpret how things would work together. and then develop an even deeper and more embodied way of building, so that it was very much an active participation. The forest like hovering canopy and columnar network that makes the architecture that was built.
So the people who were over in Italy installing this work with your very detailed instructions, although not, officious, you're giving them some agency, as you say. Did they give you any feedback on what that experience was like for them?
They said it was fun. And you said, wait a minute, how can something so intensely laborious and so meticulous and so controlled be fun? But there was a profoundly social dimension in the building, in that people gathered together in small teams and built up a rhythm of clipping things together and forming things together. And rather nostalgically, I think of my family canning food, or preserving food, or maybe a quilting bee, or a knitting circle. And I have a feeling that there was something of that rather lovely energy of sharing and working together and building up a kind of a rhythm and a cadence, where the physical act is only one of the things you're doing. You're also swapping stories and talking about your childhood or your loves or what you want to be when you grow up. I mean, I can say that I haven't decided that myself, so I've enjoyed those conversations myself.
That adds a whole other dimension to the work. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. Is it Hasim Sarkis? Is that how you pronounce his name?
Hashim is the dean of architecture at MIT
Okay.
and the artistic director of the Biennale. He had a very beautiful question: how will we live together?
Yes, that is the theme of the Architecture Biennale this year. How does Grove tie into that theme?
We started with the question of we. Who do we mean by we? And an expanded kind of spectrum, which would certainly involve insects and birds and animals, and also perhaps mineral dimensions, and planetary dimensions as well. I mean, a deeply inclusive sense of who we are, was one of the things that we tried to embrace. And living meant sustainability, meant carbon counter, meant the most radically lightweight sheet materials that would be innovated into new constructional systems. We're rather proud of the canopy and also the columnar systems, and the sense that we had just a few 100 pounds for something that would be equivalent, or kilotons and kilotons, if we were going to build a building of that dimension. So on that front, I think that we were really trying to make a contribution to a future viable way of building. And together was the other part of the question. And walls are things that create sanctuaries and create control and create clarity, but they also create profound harm in the sense of amplifying the forces that are outside and excluding some while including others. And so we really tried to do an essay in an open kind of boundary, which is not simply anything goes or a desert or a wilderness, but rather multiple layers that would very carefully strain and filter and allow people to gather together, handling and calming the kind of big different forces and unfolding things together. And so there's some very interesting new physics. A technical term is force dissipative shelters, that goes into this work that we think is very promising, and we're very hopeful that we can use in developing the technical canopies and columnar systems further.
Oh, really? Is that something that you would even trademark?
There are some innovations in this work, which are interesting intellectual property areas, and we're very interested in working on commercialization, because that's a very effective way to generate more development. And in parallel, we're also working with the open source system, in which we can really foster collective contributions. And in some ways also we're working with some universal principles that it would be absurd to try to claim. I'm describing a spectrum there, and I'm very enthusiastic about each one of those, because when they work together, it makes it possible to really make some very coherent proposals for change, and to help make some rather rapid transformations, and with the sense of the profound urgency of the need of bringing in some new ways of building into the built environment.
Anytime I see photos of people interacting with your work, members of the public interacting with your work, they always have this look of wonder on their face, as if
Mhm.
they're looking at shooting stars or fireworks or something like that, just they're just in awe. And the people listening, even if they haven't had a chance yet to see any images or film about Grove, they have seen your work. They may not know it though. For instance,
Mhm.
you have been very generous in allowing the university to use photos of other pieces on our holiday greeting cards, for instance, and the Global Impact Report. And
Mhm.
closer to home, you have currently an installation, it's permanent, called Meander at Tapestry Hall, which is an event space in Cambridge. You design buildings as well, such as the breathtaking Niagara Credit Union, with its tree like columns and canopies. And you've also collaborated on 15 collections with Dutch designer Iris van Herpen. How did that collaboration come about?
Thank you so much for just sharing that tour through some of the dimensions. And it's quite true that through the enthusiasm and energy of some really brilliant collaborators, it's been possible to work in several different media, from public architecture all the way through to making some dresses. And I was really very touched by Iris, who credited a collection in 2011 called Hybrid Holism to our previous Venice Biennale installation. We represented Canada in 2010 in the Canadian Pavilion, which is in the Giardini, in an immersive environment called Hylozoic Ground. That was done with some brilliant collaborators, Rob Gorbett, and my early collaborator from Waterloo, and Rachel Armstrong, and others. Iris liked the work and developed a collection around it, but without us knowing each other at all. and it was when it went on the runway that I found out about it. I vividly remember the first visit overlooking the Amsterdam harbor when we sat together in overstuffed chairs, and a cup of tea turned into hours and hours of conversation. We simply discovered that we were kindred spirits, and we really have been working continuously since that first meeting.
Isn't that fortunate? She's so innovative too. I mean, I follow her on Instagram, and anytime I see that there is somebody, a celebrity, for instance, wearing one of her dresses on the red carpet, I am just thrilled because I am happy that so many more eyeballs are going to get to see this amazing work of hers. So,
Iris is an extraordinary intelligence, and as a dancer, she also works in languages that are pre-verbal, in the sense that we know through dance that when you make a gesture and when you find a cadence and movement, that you're creating meaning out of our bodies. Perhaps the question of whether architecture and fashion are different is a rather interesting one. I somehow have come to feel that there is really no difference at all, but that rather that they're part of an absolutely continuous spectrum. And we very often, Iris and I, tend to experiment with new skins for body. I mean, for example,
mhm.
the experience of having a bubble bath where you're just deliciously immersed and where that makes a second skin. And perhaps if we could make buildings or at least rooms and canopies with that kind of rather gentle, open transparency, it would make buildings very, very satisfying as well.
Now, technically, though, what are your contributions to these fashion collections? These haute couture, they're haute couture.
Well, I tend to start with a technical term, cellular tessellations. Tessellation means repeating cellular units, and by working in a rather open way with some experimental units, perhaps laser cutting out some elements, thermally forming them, expanding them, stretching them, connecting them together in flexible ways that start to make a fabric, which is really no different than a mason putting bricks together to make a wall and bonding them. I mean, that is to say, you make systems, and then by stretching those out and layering them, And by trying them on around my own body or sharing them with Eris, then we start to build up a sense that these could be new kinds of layers that would expand the body. And those kind of technical innovations then very quickly turn into physical possibilities.
Now, you and I are speaking today from your studio, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of work going on. So if anyone hears any noises or bangs or crashes in the background, that's because it's a hive of activity. What else is coming up for you? I know people are working hard. You very generously showed me around virtually. Tell me what people are working on.
We have a new project that we're working on right now. It's a film and stage dressing and design project working with a wonderful Trinidadian carnival designer, Michael Lee Poi, and and a couple of lovely filmmakers, Haile Elaine and Eric Black. The film is called Emancipation Mask, at least that's the working title. And it celebrates and recognizes and bears witness to slavery and to the release from slavery and the development of an inclusive society. It's just an extraordinary honor to be able to contribute to that project. We're using the studio to create a film set, and we have many young people gathering. We're developing a story in which a child recognizes pain and then goes through release and finds profound power and really announces and bears witness to a new kind of freedom. It's such a deep honor, really, to be able to make a contribution to the fundamental changes we need, to be able to say words like "we" in a genuine way rather than in a privileged way. For myself, I can say that my primary role is to listen and to learn, and to see how others have lives that really need to be fulfilled. So that opportunity of contributing to that kind of transformation is one that's just delicious and humbling and very challenging all at once.
Where will we be able to see this film?
The celebration and the bearing witness for emancipation runs through August in Toronto, and this film will be released during that month to share and mark some of the occasions along the way. So the film will be released online by the City of Toronto,
Oh,
and there will also be some physical events, rather hesitantly, if the pandemic starts to open and makes that possible.
right. Okay, excellent. Do you have any parting thoughts for us, Philip?
The Grove Project, I think, embodies some of the deep ambivalence that is necessary in working in the world today. An ambivalence which might say that we're uncertain about what to do and that we're somehow weak and even frozen. I mean, how do we move forward? Shall we continue building? Shall we use resources to create new architecture? Is the built environment important? It raises even more difficult questions like, are nations viable? Can we really speak of those forms as being of benefit today?
Mm,
But I would say that in spite of the doubts, that Grove has unlocked a kind of optimism, and the way people are gathering and are exploring with quite a thoughtful stance. It's quite remarkable to be able to see through the web the expressions of people as they wander through and they stand and listen to the whispering voices and look into the pool and around and seeing, I think I can say, a sense of wonder, even awe, and certainly a kind of sensitivity. And so that turns my worry about the ambivalence into something different, as if the ambivalence actually is really a lovely state where you can somehow enjoy waffling back and forth, and perhaps it signals being able to see both sides of something. And maybe that state of being able to see multiple ways is an indication of wisdom, not at all a weakness, but a kind of a deep strength of something subtle emerging. So I do hope that the work can be seen as very purposeful and perhaps if it has some optimism, that it's justified.
You've given us so much to think about today, Philip. Thank you so much for your time today. It was really a pleasure and honor to speak to you.
Well, on behalf of the wonderful community at Waterloo Architecture in Cambridge and all of the university, it's a real pleasure to be able to share in this work. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you for listening to this interview from the Beyond the Bulletin podcast from the University of Waterloo. To listen to all of episode 96 or indeed any other episodes, look for Beyond the Bulletin podcast on SoundCloud.com. Please join Brandon Sweet and me for new episodes each week. And don't forget to tell your Waterloo connections about us. Until next time, thanks for going Beyond the Bulletin.